Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
Okay, well, on the phone with us now is Chris Marshall. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for calling, Chris. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about this documentary you guys got going on, and then I was going to ask you some questions.
Yes, I directed a film called An Inconvenient Tax, also produced by Vincent Vittorio and Nathan McGill. And it's basically a look at the current tax system in the United States, how we got here, what some of the problems are, and some of the potentials for reform.
All right. That was the reform. First of all, let's plug it a little better. How can they get a copy of An Inconvenient Tax?
Well, we are releasing DVDs, and I think you can go on our website on aninconvenienttax.com and sign up for that. It's also on cable and satellite video on demand right now.
Interesting.
So
how long is it?
The documentary is about 80 minutes.
Okay. So it sounds like you're going to be covering a lot of territory in that 80 minutes.
Yes, I think we do a pretty good job of covering the history of taxes in the United States. It gives people a good base from which to judge what's going on in the current code and understand a little bit about why some of the problems that are there exist.
Chris, since you've had the opportunity to do this exhaustive study, do you have a favorite tax code or tax scheme?
Well, we were careful in the film not to pick any favorites. We didn't want to be pegged as someone who had an agenda.
I understand.
Correct. But we did talk to a lot of very intelligent people, experts, economists, and it was interesting. A lot of the people that we talked to, in one form or another, were liked the idea of incorporating consumption taxes more into the current code. From an economist perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Now, how you get there, there's a lot of debate over that still.
I would favor a consumption tax myself as opposed to an income tax, and I'd say right off the top of my head, first of all, we're done playing games with what's, this passive and active income, those kind of shenanigans, whether
right.
You write the asset off in 84 months or 30 years. I mean, you end all that. Anyone that's here illegally, that income now or that money now starts getting taxed. We're done money laundering. I mean, I see a lot of benefits, although I think a lot of people would have a hard time swallowing 20% income or a sales tax.
Right. And a consumption tax can be achieved both as a sales tax, which some people have proposed. Also, you can do it in a way that makes it look like an income tax. There were plans that have been proposed by Steve Forbes and Dick Armey and various other people who basically, as long as you don't tax savings or the return on investment, you can get to what economists would consider a consumption tax, because at the end of the day, you're only taxing what people spend and not what they save. And so how you do that, you can kind of play around with it a bit, but the whole idea of not taxing savings seems to have a lot of long-term benefits.
As a free market economist guy, we think the big part of the problem we have, and one of the big problems that we're undergoing through a correction right now, is that we've had a consumption-based lifestyle. We've been borrowing money as a nation to buy stuff we didn't need, and a consumption tax would generate savings, which is the real way to become a productive, healthy economy, in my opinion. So I favor the consumption tax.
Yes, and actually, our current tax code does have some elements of a consumption tax already in it. There are tax-deferred savings plans, simple IRAs, 401ks, those sort of things. Those types of plans move us in the direction of a consumption tax. So we're sort of in a mix right now, and like you said, we'd like to move a little bit farther in the consumption tax direction. But there are some very interesting debates out there right now is, well, what exactly do you do to make the system? How do you build the system to achieve the goals that you want?
And what's your suggestion there?
Well, personally, I think that everyone is familiar with filing some sort of tax form, even if it can be in a very simple way. To get people in the system, it's a good idea, and then have provisions that allow for savings. That might solve a lot of problems. If you completely wiped out a form, submitting an income tax type form, and you only went to a sales tax, then you have a lot of other issues to put on the table. Not to say that it can't be done as having an entire system that only raised money through a sales tax or a value-added tax, but there are a lot of other questions to answer if you go that route.
Chris,
and we're familiar with the system already. So,
Chris, did you get into the 16th Amendment and that whole debate on whether that thing was properly ratified? And I mean, there's a lot of
the income tax.
Yes,
you mean?
Yeah, I know that's kind of a conspiracy theory thing. A lot of the tax protesters go back to the 16th Amendment as a grounds by which they don't pay an income tax.
Well, we do talk about when the income tax was adopted for good in our movie back in 1913, and it was actually contested of whether this type of tax should be used in the United States, even back to the Civil War. And there were proponents and detractors, and it was a strong debate after the Civil War up until the turn of the century to say, a lot of people didn't want it, and some people did, and eventually there was enough movement to push it through. I think it just came down to the number of people supporting it got it pushed through, and whether or not you can make a distinction of the legality. The fact of the matter was that it had a strong enough support to push it through and make it law.
Chris, I think that brings up a really interesting point. I think most people just assume that we've always had an income tax, and in fact, the income tax, how we have, at least the form we have today, is less than 100 years old. It's relatively new, speaking in terms of the length of time that our country's been in existence. So that's definitely interesting.
Yes, and there are lots of figures back to Alexander Hamilton and all kinds of figures throughout our history that have commented and talked about debate. And we're hoping that our film will cause people to investigate a little bit more into their own history and to not just pay their taxes, but understand why they're paying them and where those taxes came from. Yeah,
and also understanding that there are possible alternatives out there to the current system. I mean, the current system is not necessarily the most optimal or even necessarily sufficient at all. There might be some better alternatives that we need to explore.
Chris, I understand y'all had to take an objective opinion. I mean, you were basically just educating people on the tax code, so you couldn't actually advocate one or the other, but you're saying the consensus of these very intelligent people you talked to, that the consensus of those people was a consumption tax rather than an income tax.
Well, not across the board. There were people that did favor a simplified income tax,
like a flat tax.
Well, you can do a flat tax. That you can also just simplify the income tax by taking away a lot of the loopholes, if you will, in our current system. There are a myriad of deductions and exclusions, exemptions, all these things that make the tax code thousands and thousands of pages long and making the system very opaque. A lot of people argue, well, if we can just sort of clean out the system and make it simpler for everyone, which is also the objective of some of the tax plans like the Steve Forbes flat tax and the Dick Armey flat tax and others like that the simplicity would help a lot, just because everybody is on the same page.
I could agree with that. Now tell us once again how they can get to your documentary.
And Inconvenient.com is our website. You can find out lots of information there. And you can also buy the DVD and you can check your video on demand listings at your cable or satellite provider to watch it there, and a number of other places online you can find it on demand to watch.
Chris, now Vincent said y'all are working on another project right now. Is it economic related, or y'all off in some other venture?
Well, I can't talk about that too much yet because it's just starting, but there is an element of economics in it for sure. That's also a very interesting one, and hopefully we can talk about that one soon.
Chris, thank you very much for taking the time to call us and our listeners today, and please give my regards to Vincent.